Here she is, Veronica Bruce.
Hello, thanks for coming, you guys. I appreciate it. I'm glad you guys come see the show and have hopefully a good conversation about the work. And I guess in starting off talking about the work, I'm just going to talk about some of the things that I find to be the most important aspects of my process in making the work. And I work simultaneously with more traditional paintings, photography, and these sculptures. And the sculptures are of primary interest to me, but they really can't exist without working in the other aspects. And while I'm working, I'm really tying together observation and interaction in my daily life, whether it's then accessing materials that I find or taking images as I go along. I'm kind of combining that, what I kind of reference as my outside material, exterior world. I mix that in with, within the studio, my own personal interaction and manipulation and putting my residue within these materials that I interact with. And so, in a simple way, it's this combination of the external material and my own internal perceptions and way of being within these things that I come across. And within my work, I'm very interested in utilizing these found materials, but it has nothing to do with like recycling or, you know, using materials for that purpose in the conventional way of recycling, which maybe that doesn't come across at all, but for some reason I feel like defensive against that. I don't know why, but I'm really interested in how within my day you can have gut instinctual reactions to moments and objects that I'm not quite sure as to why, because I don't usually pick up materials for a certain piece at one moment. I just pick it up because I know I want to utilize it. But I do it very selectively. I don't have a studio of like tons and tons and tons of stuff. You know, I'm not like a pack rat, I guess. But I've been told that usually hoarders say they're not hoarders. I'm really done. So anyway, sidetrack. Lately, though, within this body of work, I started to allow myself to use things that weren't as distant to me, that were kind of in my path quite obviously, like materials that got into my studio because of the personal reasons of moving a lot in this last year. So I ended up having, you know, the categories of home life, apartment goods, now within my studio space, studio goods. And within this moving back and forth from Philadelphia to Chicago, in and out of apartments, whatnot, a lot of your life ends up in boxes. And for me, I kind of started to recognize this accumulation of debris, materials that may or may not even have like use to me anymore, you know, that you start to bring around that you don't really actually need. And so I guess going on a tangent, I started to recognize that these boxes that I was moving around held some interest to me, and especially within the studio, like when you have remnants of drawings, remnants of paintings, remnants of sculptures, all of a sudden all like coming together in these boxes, I started to realize that I was interested in all these shards and discarded moments. So a lot of this work has to do with materials and elements that came into being from my moving studio debris work and finding materials where I'm going. So one that I'll speak about in particular to start, so it's not as general, is this piece here, somewhere along the line with the blue ribbon and behind Dana. And that piece took on a few different forms within my studio to here because of the installation aspect within the space, but I was really happy with how I installed it within this space to seem really to be a part of, and that it was meant to be here. I liked it in my studio as well. I had lower pipes and it took on a few different variations of drawing within the wall, but I was happy with how it is here. And that piece actually is a vase underneath that was from my old place I lived, and you know, I'm not gonna go too into that, but that's what it is. And a lot of the actual elements of the top of that sculpture were probably the week I got back from Philadelphia in August this summer, and a lot of it is mailing tape and packaging materials from unwrapping boxes I had to send back here, and I like to mix, obviously, like the traditions of painting and sculpture together. I mean, I primarily have a painting vocabulary or background or whatever, but so a lot of these pieces to me are three-dimensional paintings in the sense that I'm thinking about them as if I was working on a painting. And so I do like to throw in the occasional element of recognition that everyone can notice as a full item from the world, not all shards and remnants. So within that piece, there's the paint tube, which I believe is the only solid item that is recognizable. Yes, thank you. In the little micro world that exists there. And I guess the ribbon, that's not really too solid. So, my slight reference to painting as well. But within these sculptures, the process of making them goes through multiple stages, and the end aspect of undoing the mold is kind of the part that I'm making the real painterly decisions. Because when I'm removing the mold from the sculptures, it's like every element and piece that you take off, you're then like reconsidering the composition that's going on with the item. And so, to me, that's one of the most exciting parts of making these. Like after I make a sculpture and I wait a few days and go back, and then start to deal with unraveling the mold is like one of the most exciting parts for me.
And what's the mold?
The cardboard box.
Cardboard box.
Most of these. That is not, and that's not. But within this piece and that piece, they both existed in these cardboard boxes that I have everywhere. And so after I cast the elements that I decide to put together, I come back a few days later and then decide how much to take off or how much to leave. Within this piece, obviously there's elements that are left and considered to be left, and others that I pull away. And so yeah, let's try that. Anyway, I've been using different molds than just the cardboard boxes, but that was kind of like that's been a main thread that's been going on. A few years ago, I started to work in the same method, but it was on like a lot smaller of a scale, and just singular materials or objects within, creating like wall drawings. And this last summer through now, I've been working on a bigger scale with them, and like the piece outside, and pushing that. But and that was actually within the blue container that I've carried around for years, probably from like growing up. Which brings me to another tie, I guess, is a lot of the stuff that I've been recently using are, like for the viewer to see. I know no one knows where these materials are, where they came from, or how I decided to use them, and I don't necessarily need to tell people, where they were from or whatnot. I think that the pieces are interesting and engaging enough without that information, but for me, there is an underlying, like, narrative or autobiographical type of tie to a lot of the pieces. Not always, but, I don't know. So, a lot of the stuff that exists in my studio for moving has been a lot of furniture and things that I even had growing up that I, like, started to tear apart and use. Like, a coffee table is now in pieces. Chairs are now being utilized. If things start to get into my studio, they're at risk. So they are definitely at risk. My poor mother doesn't like when I come over anymore. I'm like, can I have that? And she's like, what? One of the blue strings I took from her, it was in her closet. I was like, can I please have this ribbon? I know what I want to do with it. So, yeah, I'm going on tangents. But I guess that brings me to thinking about the different ways in which I accumulate the materials that I use. Are one, normal daily tasks, finding them in my daily, doing. And two, if I come across something and I ask others for it, which I think is important because it gets me out of a place of being concerned about what anybody like thinks about my choices, if that makes sense. And so whether it be someone in a Home Depot that I have to go stalk and ask to get a material, or it'd be, you know, going to someone's home and noticing a possibility of use of material and asking for it. And then third, the materials are just generated themselves within like your own, you know, studio process and debris and elements that you hate that don't actually, you know, sculptures that aren't solidified yet just become parts that like you don't care about for a long time, and then like finally I pull them together to be something. And so those are my 3 ways.
And how,
Yeah,
can I,
yeah, please.
and so with everything existing in a sort of transitional, you know, there's all these parts and they can come together to become something and be reconfigured in these different ways. When do they become something?
It's a good question. And I've thought about this a lot of times. I'm like, when do I really hit that point where I'm no longer considering it a side note? You know, because there is a point. You know, I have an attachment to this now that I don't want to alter it anymore. It's done for me. And we'll see. Maybe I'll get to a point where then I just keep going. But I'm not sure exactly. I mean, honestly, when I get to a point where I'm with the material and the object and I get like elated with it, I just know it's done.
Elation.
Yeah. Like yeah.
Do you go back to them later?
If it hasn't hit a point of elation, yes.
So is that,
Yes.
is elation, I mean, you say elation and I think like bubbliness, like going up.
Like the other day when I was talking with you, remember when we were talking about those photos? And then I started to talk about maybe drilling holes in them and then like attaching something, and then you're like, whoa, your eyes just got really lit up. And I was like, that's kind of what I mean. So not a bubbly like, woohoo, this looks so pretty. Definitely not.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no
There's none of that. It's more like a recognition that it's exciting to me. It generates some kind of like power and excitement. And I know that's so hard, I can't articulate why.
Well, what you just said was about like aggression, right? Like now I can drill some holes in it and like, you know.
Well, yeah.
But to me so there's this contradiction in that, and maybe it's because I'm not quite understanding, but like
Well, maybe it's the fulfillment that exists after the physical, like, aggression and manipulation. Because I'm definitely interested in the physical manipulation of the materials, and that's of, like, high importance to me. And so for whatever, and that kind of parallels the concept of these being material, physical items in conjunction with my, like, internal mental, emotional state, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Have you titled each piece?
Yes.
Can you tell us what they are?
Yes, and I'll make sure that I don't mess them up. So, okay, and what the one outside in the hall with the blue bin on the cart is maybe it's not you, it's them. Outside in the hall with this photograph is with the 2 photographs is straight ahead. The pink piece with the can is called Looking Pretty. This piece here is called Changing Gears. This piece here is called Almost There. This piece here is Calm Down. See, I like that. Okay.
This is a dog, but you're talking about something.
This is the physical response I had to it. Calm down. Alright, this is in the corner, and that's called Somewhere Along the Line. So yeah.
I guess my the question is trying to figure out, you know, a number of ways of getting toward kind of the meaning for you about what these things are. I mean, you talked about how you make them and the excitement of them, but in regards to maybe an overlying content of some quality of connection for you.
For me, I like to look at them as acknowledgement of being like present, because it's within my own daily experiences and my own physical self in the moment with the materials. So for me, I think that I think they speak of being present and of acknowledgement of how things are all interconnected. I mean, that's what I conceptually like recognize when I'm working with them. And you know, with these different pieces, like they kind of hold different characters to me or states of being, and so I like how my work's able to kind of express these different states for myself personally. I don't know if that answers that or not, but and within titling, like the word, like the one out there, the big honk around the cart, that's so maybe it's not you, it's them, and like with that, I like to think of that as like that's mental clutter and debris and like bullshit you can like worry about or that I can personally worry about, and so a lot of these pieces to me can become these accumulations of like discarding mental debris. And so that's why I titled it that kind of maybe it's not you, it's them, that self-analytical like wording or debate in your head about other shit. Yeah.
So it's more about intimacy than ecstasy, though. Like intimacy is going inside yourself, being introverted and going through your consciousness and following that through your everyday kind of activities, and then ecstasy is the complete opposite of kind of the extroversion, the externalized world. So
True.
Yeah.
So I agree.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm just trying to follow.
I'm not trying to make you have a state of elation in looking at my piece, if that's like what you're kind of getting to.
Yeah.
Well, why not?
It's just not of my primary interest when I'm doing it.
Is it happening?
What's that?
Yeah.
Do I feel elated?
Do you feel like the experience of making is sort of resonant and available in the experience of what you're out there?
Yes, just because I feel like a lot of the work seems to point so obviously towards like adjustment and alteration, and that there's constantly like a possibility present in like, so many like places where like things could potentially be tweaked. Like I think I respond well to the potential, and I think that's why. Well, I felt that this piece was like, I was like attracted to this the most when I first saw the show. But then now that I sit here with it, I realize that that's probably the most resolved out of all of these. And there's so many like kind of clues as to things being adjusted with things. Once being held somewhere else, like how you like decided to hang that a little bit lower. And so like now it feels so like resolved in the room of all of these. Now I have like the switch to see something else like fucking up in it.
Like to continue to adjust it, or in addition to interact.
Something I don't know, like it, like sort of that sort of almost red sand color thing that's like coming up the shelf is I don't know, like that sort of the way like ties and things are like laid out on the floor, like now they seem like I'm not quite sure like how convinced I am, like when you say that you feel like that's been totally resolved, that you don't think you can like do anything else to it. Just the way like from seeing the way like things are held together, like I don't know like if I can fully believe it.
Then you want it. You don't think it. Wait, you just said that you thought it was the most resolved.
Yeah, but also like I don't really know
Well,
if I wanted to like feel that way.
I was just gonna say, because I work in this mode of like wanting to be accepting of new possibilities and changing with items and adjusting and continuation, like I do get to a point where they're done. But if they project a concept of being able to continually like cycle forward, that's interesting to me. I don't know if that becomes a conflict for a viewer that they feel is resolved or not, but
I think that's, I mean, that is where the confusion of the show lies, right? That things both feel complete, contained, like that each thing is an individual, discrete object, and yet there's sort of like unresolvedness. But so they're doing this kind of funny dance between like extreme states of process and unresolvedness and sort of like discrete object contained within itself, autonomous.
Can the thing further destabilize, or is it just like isolated, done?
Right.
You know what I do really like what happened in your installation? I don't know if it's about prior discussion, but the way everything seems very low to the ground. And what I'd like to know how you decided it's separate over here, but I was thinking about this room and how dwarfed I feel in regards to how the pressure or what, the way you arrange and the feeling of the ground is very evident. You know, there are things that are high, but just looking at you over there, there's so much space in regards to the dialogue between the space and the object, which I think is exciting, what happened. And the feeling that we're all sitting here, and I feel like this ceiling feels 10 times maybe bigger than what it is. I mean, in an exaggeration, but there's a certain thing that happened in your installation that I think was really cool. So I don't know if you were thinking that way or.
yeah, I mean, I wanted to have these lower elements like drawing down into the floor to really occupy this lower space, and obviously that's my recognition of the vastness of the space that these elements exist in, and I mean, so I considered trying to draw your attention down
That was really good.
and up, and yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the drawing with the ribbon does a whole lot for me, especially in terms of dialogues of sculpture around the figurative and the architectonic. You know, like all these things are super figurative and super low, and they're brought low, and Judith is totally right. Like you've split the space horizontally about halfway up, so we're really sort of brought into the notion of process of studio of things like being jury-rigged or sort of tensely assembled from the bottom up. This idea is this sort of figurative thing that addresses, that sort of becomes architectonic and trying to address like the limits of the room, I think, and using sort of like the prop or like having to hang on to something. Like these things don't rise of their own volition very much. You know, like they can send out a sort of prosthetic reach that goes all the way up. Everything else, like because they're heavy, because they're figurative, they stay low, which is cool.
Well, I was really excited about the relationship between this image and that,
Yes.
the architecture drawn
Yes,
within
yes,
that part, because you know this is my compressed portable rendition of these objects, and so you know, it's a photograph of a sculpture in a studio space with lighting in the corners and the linear perspective and like all the smushed in concept of space with painting, and so I really made the decision with those lines and decided upon the architectural elements of those lines because of looking at this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that one carries its architecture with it from another place.
So, yes.
I think to Min's point and to Judith's question about the titles earlier, and stuff that Lana was saying too, the way that you explain your process and the way you sort of explain your engagement with these materials doesn't necessarily seem to be all that the work's about. It doesn't seem to be how it means, really. It's just like, yeah, I can see where stuff comes from and the sort of residue and trace of that, and the idea of not recycling but repurposing these things, the sort of lowness of taking something broken and taking something, the sort of agglomerated figurative body out of that. I think that even though it's super interesting and I relate to it as someone who makes things, I think more the way that this work works for me is this idea of the like feminine brutal. That's what I kept thinking. Just like small movements accruing to something that's like kind of ugly, these sort of like infernal body machines of these things. It seemed like they have operational qualities, but I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what verbs they have, you know, but they're low, itchy, twitchy for all the sort of physicality of pouring cement, how these things work is in a very sort of insidious, like small, knuckly moves way. I don't know if feminine brutal makes any sense for you, but like,
Yes,
but that wasn't true for me anymore before. But seeing the show, like, seeing it all together, I was like, oh, nice. Yeah, so you have something to say about this, right?
I have things to
Like
say
how
about
it
feminine,
communicates.
that are much more like, I guess I just had this sort of, I went home to print your titles lists out and like glanced at my bookshelf and I was like, oh, this is what I want to talk about with the work, but it's way more sort of, it's really far over here, it's not so much like questions for you, it's like ways that suddenly started getting framed in my mind. So I don't know if this is the time for that, but.
Well,
Yeah, I need to be like, yeah.
I mean, for me, in regards to like giving you more of a context of how I see myself in these objects, I always find it difficult. We were just talking about this, I think the other day, you and I about Sam about like the inability for me to find the exact words and language is evident in why I'm making these. I know that it's like could be like a cop out or whatever, but
No.
I find it hard to articulate why I make the decisions that I make.
Right.
And not in, I mean, obviously I can articulate why I'm making these things, but like in regards to saying like how they're pulling together these violent, aggressive, or more masculine type of physical gestures with more feminine, like slow, considered elements, like that's what I am. I don't know. I don't know.
I think in the treatment of your materials, I get the feeling like, well, when I look at a painting, when I look at a move, the moves you've made reflect your vision of what you're excited about, and it could be like what's underneath, whatever, or the tension. There's a lot of elements of the way that things come together, and there's also this feeling of accidental events that consciously you recognized and kept, or the whim of the way it came out when you pour, the casting of it, and the unexpected. I feel like there's a lot of unexpected that happens in the making of something, and I get that when I look around and see the moves you've made. I'm getting the feeling of what you decided would stay and what would go.
Well, I mean, that's good. I'm glad.
So I mean, collectively, that kind of can build up to a kind of, I don't know, there's no word, there
I mean,
no
I'm
words.
interested in like a matter of will and circumstance. I mean, for sure, and coming together, and so.
I love how the like you say, like accidentally she comes across these things or you come across these things, but if you are present in the moment, like they're not accidents, they're supposed to happen. So like I feel like each piece is obviously telling a story and they're all interconnected, like you said. And if they've even been brought since like a childhood house to a studio in Philadelphia, like I believe you said the word, not recycle, repurpose. That's like, I love that. I don't know, I know it's just like a little comment or whatever, but then how you use the space to like, how you use the space is incredible because it allows us to not feel like limited within. Because if this is like you said, it's like the elements within that allows it to like, do its thing and grow and be and not, like it doesn't have to stay in that position. And you said that you're so like happy and content with where that piece is, but to not be closed enough in the sense of like, you could go back to it and do something. I don't know, it's just.
Right, going back to the element of at one point, could it still be altered or not? Continually worked on.
Do you make them quickly or slowly?
Well, a lot of the parts are pieces that have been worked on for a long time, but they remain parts for a long time. The actual physically putting together is usually quick, and I really love working with cement and plaster because of that immediacy and because of that, to me, relation to decision making in a painterly way. But they'll be fast and I make decisions in quick moments, but then they'll sit for a few days, I come back and do the next process, you know, and so there are multiple quick moments. And yeah. I lost my train of thought, what was I gonna say about that?
Do you find in the studio that a lot of the moves you're making are additive or subtractive? Like, is there?
Mostly additive, and I'm trying to get conscious of the fact that it's mostly additive, and
With cardboard box removal, that's the big.
but that's my subtractive, and that's it's an exciting subtractive moment for me. Yes.
Because that's a reveal, whereas
Yes.
is the additive less.
The additive comes together when I'm making my preparation of choices with the materials and moments and what I want to use, and when I'm casting, then I sometimes make some last minute decisions because I don't see that it's final, and once it's set, and I come back and I'm either cutting away the plastic and revealing and having that mold become a part of the piece, or completely taking off the mold is like my main subtractive element. And I usually take, another thing is I'm taking photographs of these pieces in process in the studio as well that then end up becoming pieces like that. Yeah.
I have two questions. There's an essay called Kant After Duchamp by Joseph Kassuth, and he talks about art as being functioning like, this actually has a point, I'm not just going to explain this, but I just wanted to tell you about this.
I'm listening.
Anyway, he talks about art as being necessarily questioning art's status or art's existence. And then he talks about an artist, like he uses Richard Serra as an example of someone who he does not consider to be involved in the process of making art, that he is in just the process of an activity. And you're talking a lot about your studio practice as being seemingly this continued activity that, like even to get sort of, double meaning, like you used the word casting, the first thing I went to is sort of like casting characters or putting, certain ensembles together, like with the double meaning of that word. And the two questions would be like, how do you see this as becoming art? Does it become art and become like solidified as art only when it's in the gallery? Is there a point in your studio that you stop and say, okay, good, that's art now, and that's not just something that I'm putting together? And also, when they are in the gallery, do you see them sort of as composites, like in casting of different players, sort of in one thing? Or do you see them as completely unified,
Separate parts.
Separate.
Yeah. Well, in their making in the studio and in the gallery, I see them as separate parts, and I see them as separate characters. And but I acknowledge how they fit as an ensemble. And so I have a ton of pieces I could have chosen to put within the show. And so these are separate pieces that can exist on their own, I find, but the choices I made were dependent upon the character type that I thought each piece was.
Yeah. So some of them are more ensemble, do you think, than others? Like the one on the wall for me particularly looks very singular, and some of the others, especially like the one with the ribbon, and they do seem more like an ensemble piece of like different, to use the word characters interacting with each other, and that seemed to be like the structure of it. I was just wondering how that reflected.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of have the full spectrum of the piece that looks as if it's kind of still in motion or process and not fully resolved versus the finalized, framed, pristine, portable piece versus the wall sculpture that references composition of painting and or the elements that rely just on the space here. So I wanted to have that difference of the pieces that I chose. I don't know if that answers that, but so as all those differences come together within these parts, like yeah, this creates, you know, in any installation in a space with pieces, it creates a dialogue between these objects in particular, and I am excited by like the dialogue between the positioning of a lot of these objects, so it's gonna be interesting to me when I do return them to their singularity. But when I'm making them, I'm not making them to fit a scene at this point. I mean,
Okay.
I'm making them individually.
Okay.
A lot of times simultaneously, but you know.
But there is a kind of, I mean, through the titling and through, you know, like you made this one and you were like, ooh, calm down or something. Like it seems like, or maybe this is me projecting too much, but if you're talking about a kind of internal consciousness of your relationship to these objects, like once you've told one to calm down, then maybe another one can be like doing something, right, okay, so if that one has to go, ooh, then this one has to go, or something, and like then they start, I mean, it seems like there's that sort of relationship to them, which is kind of what Charles is.
Yes.
That there would be a dialogue, whether or not you're
Yes.
actually doing it spatially, it's happening
Right.
here,
Yes.
yeah. Orchestrating the voices or something.
I feel like
Orchestrating the
there's a
voices.
lot of dialogue already present even within the titles too, cause like your position shifted when you said this was calm down. Like it seemed like that you were like addressing the sculpture, like the sculpture wasn't like I am calm down. Like you're like the voice changed and that really kind of opened up my reading or like my standing in this room. And the more I look at that one too, it's really funny because like I didn't realize how much of like Liechtenstein was present for me in that until I like sat here and started looking at it and then like I thought really it was like mostly about sculpture until I started looking at that and was able to see it because even like his sculpture, like his wall works tend to be smaller and they're pretty like flat too. You know like which ones I'm talking about? Yeah, like I was like, okay, now I see that. I don't know if I'm supposed to, but it seems to be in line with like what you're talking about. And also like how does economy figure or like economy in terms of like commerce figure in your work? Is that because you're
Well, I was thinking about this today, but I'm interested in the economy of. I like to. Let me restate this. I like the concept of old energies becoming new energies, and I know that sounds kind of like fluffy, but I and I don't like fluffy, but I think that there's economy in that concept. Like within that case, it's heavily relying on a found curtain piece that I found like last spring. This horrible, ugly, huge theatrical curtain that I came across in my old studio, and I've been using like elements of that piece for a long time, and I actually did some finishing parts in the studio right now that are using the ends of it. And there's satisfaction that I get in like using all the parts. And so for me, that is some tied to an economic use of things available to me. And it's not about me, I mean, yeah, I guess I'd like to use what I have so I don't need to be out like buying stuff, but I just get satisfaction out of like you used all of these parts successfully. Like it's some kind of like challenge or something to be able to do that. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, because I think it's a question, because you and I had talked in your studio before about the Frank Stella Moby Dick sculpture, where it's just like everything in my studio will go into this one thing and sort of get like agglomerated into this
Right.
big nasty monster machine. But I think that because the human body is the constant, because that's how the scale is determined, these things do sort of end up being torso sized or head sized or like leg sized. Like the size of a pet, of course that's calm down. It's like it's down where the pets are. But yeah, I think like everything is being used, but I was wondering like okay, so they're built until they refer to a part of the body, a fragment,
Yeah.
not to the whole thing. None of these are like,
Yeah, you're right, you're right.
your little robot, which I was calling Jenny, what's it called? The thing on Sunday?
I didn't know you were calling it.
It's not you, it's
I thought we were just calling it a robot.
Maybe it's not you.
Maybe it's not you, it's them.
Sorry, so Jenny, like, even Jenny, like, had to be sort of a crouching form. Like,
Yeah.
nothing is the erect,
Yeah, no,
standing
they're all
figure.
parts,
Like, they're all kind
Mm-hmm.
of crouching, or, and that's sort of like where the kind of verbs of making come in. Things are toppling or falling or tense or crouching or poised to sort of act in some way. Yeah. It's interesting that you're like at the end of the curtain now, because I've known that curtain for a while.
I know.
It's like, are we, the curtain era is over, like, it's a whole
I
new
know.
thing.
Find a new job.
Well, there was a part of me that was like,
You're still a buffalo.
there's a part of me that's like, you're still freaking using this thing, but then I'm like, yeah, there's more I can do with it, so I've still been using it, but
That would be really kind of cool, just like maybe for your own sort of studio experiment, I guess, like putting everything with the curtain together, so you
Yeah.
have the whole curtain
Yeah.
again.
Hmm.
Because I was kind of wonder where the limit is, because you're right, because new things are introduced into the studio, you get something from your mom, you find something else here, and like the whole process, the whole practice is in flux all the time. Like you have to use everything eventually. But there is this moment where you're like, all right, it's moving day, everything gets stuck to this thing, and everything is really fresh and rich.
yeah.
That would be interesting also, because it would sort of not just, like right now, your work seems to be really centered on taking and building into something else, or building, like what if you took, like after building into something else, sort of reintegrating into the original thing that would sort of put like, to give it a visual, I guess, like an extra track hook on sort of the effect of your work, because like you were saying, like when I come in and I see that thing on the floor, it's almost like I walked over an open space that's sort of like, and so my attention completely drops to the floor with that. And then to have that and then complete in the context of this bigger reconstructed curtain would sort of like put an extra hinge on it. And, if that's a strange visual, sorry, but that's sort of like the mechanism I was thinking about it. Sort of the mechanism of the thought would be, it would sort of have this weird sort of click clack kind of rhythm. Sorry.
No.
It's interesting.
Yeah, because what is going on there, I think, is this sort of dredging operation. Like once the dredging starts of the studio end of the world, like how, it's not going to stop. And I think like naming for yourself, not a false limit, but like maybe an arbitrary or a standardized limit, I guess. Just like, and then blank, and then new stuff. But I think like that's part of the resonance and generosity of the project for me, I think, is like opening yourself up to this sort of dredging that like I can't ever see the end. Like we talked this before, like could you ever find something that's too nice?
Well,
Just like, oh no, that's actually it's a satin pillow. I don't want the satin pillow. I want the satin cotton pillow.
yeah.
So there's a degree of like the discard has to avail itself of its history really fast. I think like things have to look a little bit normal, a little bit fucked up, a little bit. Yeah, I think that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's okay.
Does anyone have any questions about pieces in particular?
A funky question.
Alright.
Alright, I'm gonna see if I can actually word it.
It's okay.
Maybe my question is this practice the difference between me and I? Referencing you, not me, wait,
Hang on.
me and I. Like if I was you, I'm talking about I and me.
Go slow.
No. Okay. But so like taking me as subject, so as maybe like writing an autobiography but in third person or something like that, and then having I as the content of the work, where it's very much. I don't actually even know how to like give an example of that. But it's because you go when you're talking about the work, you're going back and forth between saying I chose this because Veronica wanted to do this or something like that. So I'm curious as to like is that the drudging, that kind of thing? Is it like, where are you, what sparks those things or something like that? I don't know what my question really is, but I'm just like, kind of,
Well, like a self-reflective
Begging.
drudging and like continual self-reflective kind of drudging where you're, I mean, I know what you're talking about as I'm going between me talking about these pieces as me as an outside influence on the object versus the object existing on its own.
Or the object having an effect on you, because I would be like the subjective pronoun.
And then me interacting with this
Me
is,
is the
you need to
objective
calm
pronoun,
which is really a reflective concept to myself.
yeah.
Totally. This is true, you know.
Yeah.
This to me is a reflection of my nature of sometimes getting like slow the F down kind of a thing. Calm down, Veronica.
So-
It's like, so, yes, that's
Veronica after the title.
Yeah, and so I'm externalizing that, but then also
Almost there, Veronica.
in terms of language, you were using the pronoun you at a certain point when you were talking, right? So like when some people say, I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, but there's this sort of more colloquial vernacular thing that people do where they say you, but they mean I. You know, like,
Yes.
so you'll be like shopping or something, and then
Yes.
like blah, 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 but what they mean is, I was shopping.
yes, and I say you.
But they use the you, and it's like this weird, like, and it always sort of fires off in my brain where I'm like, why do you not use the I? And you've been mentioning that before.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and sometimes I get conscious of that fact of stop saying you because you don't know whether that is true for you or not. I only know that it is true for me. So I sometimes just like say the you thing out of habit, and then I
you
consciously correct myself.
Which I think is really
I don't know.
super interesting in terms of everything we've been talking about and you know, telling yourself, you know,
Yeah.
making external versions of yourself, like working
Yeah.
through subjecthood or something, and where one locates oneself
Yeah.
in. Are you worried about this?
No, I'm not worried about it. I think it's interesting.
Well, because I really want to play Late Brilliant right now really badly, and I can't do it very well. But I really want to try. I don't, and the thing that people are talking about with this and the you and the I and like how much of what you're doing is super symptomatic of like how we are all expected, like Mim was asking about economics, like how we're all being expected to sort of keep moving, right? Like nobody, the modern subject is over and everybody has to have freelance, multiple jobs, and you're like an extreme state of this right now, of like temporal fragility, right? It's just like, where do you live, where do you work, that these things can't even be differentiated, that they're like, you know, you're operating with a self-enfragrance right now, like out of an economic necessity. And not of a real artistic choice. I think you're trying to make a transition from being a school teacher to being an artist, you're trying to make a transition from being a student to being an artist. Like you're just in like, and in that way you're operating at the crossroads of a place that everybody is being expected to operate in more and more in our culture. And so thinking about it in those terms as sort of symptomatic of like kind of like the worst state of flux that we're expected to be in, and then getting this sort of beautiful positive outcome, right? Like coaxing this into being some kind of a transformative thing. But so I guess like Lane is always sort of talking about what's, you know, this is his critique, right? And that one of the ways he's talked about it is like, but then when do you say stop? Like if you're going to try to build a train track for your house or something, like do you stand up and say, you know, because the old idea of the autonomous object and the modern subject, you know, that they would take a position or something. So he's always complaining about Rachel Harrison putting wheels on everything, because he's like, what, is everything mobile? Everything can move now? Nothing ever takes a position? You know, so this sort of, I don't know if this is something, but there was more I was going to say about that actually. Can I keep talking for a second? Yeah. So the other thing about it though is that what Dana said about the feminine rule, that there's so much femininity to this. And one of the things that I've been sort of hearing him say in relation to all of this is that there's a kind of demise of the sort of masculine, patriarchal, institutional, modern structures. And he hasn't said a rise of the feminine, but I would actually I would say that or something. And which makes me go back to all the things that I've loved, like Diane Rothman, Chris Kraus, Leslie Dick, Fannie Howe, like all of these sort of marginal female writers that I think suddenly are making you think about your work and making you think about how might actually be a mainstream model all of a sudden. Like, this might actually be the thing rather than a marginal. I don't know if that's like too much of a mouthful or something, but is this making any sense to anybody else?
Yes.
It's just super fascinating to me, and I don't know if that's, the way we're talking about subjectivity, the way we're talking about externalizing, the way we're talking about creating narratives and consciousness and having these sorts of conversations with oneself,
No, I know what you're because even sort of in the introduction of the Raphael Rodenstein essay a couple years ago, this introduction of this word provisional.
Right.
It's like it's hard to find something that isn't provisional. As far as like things like sort of suspended, isolated out of context, these things were moving around were like active, live fragments and variables, and now we're suspended from this moment of tension out. Like, and that's the thing, like sort of constant operational dredging quality of the thing is like, it is like when does it stop? And like when can it stop? And sort of setting yourself up. And Molly's right, I think too, these sort of like beautiful results that go up, I think in all of these. Like you're not pointing out the bottom, this sort of like nasty, despairing, bored hubris at the bottom. Like hubris is kind of on the argument too, because like dominant paradigmatic structures like monoculture heroism, meaning bronze things that actually stand up that aren't turds. You know, like that's kind of over. So these things do have that. They hold their marginality, they hold their sort of becomingness, and they hold their transitoriness, I think, because there's no alternative, I guess. And when you set yourself up for, in terms of process and motive, this kind of dredging, then it's a kind of almost symptomatic, unbearable watchfulness or alertness, going through the world with this kind of like, can I eat that? Can I take that? Can I use that? You know, having to repurpose things by force, by economic necessity, which is part of the power and sort of politics of the work going on too. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's
exactly what I'm talking about. Totally. Can I eat that? Can I use that? Can I keep your eyes open?
Yeah, I mean, it's
like
constant awareness.
And having the same levels, like you can't get too far out of yourself because you have to be like, well, what next? And there's kind of defensiveness to that, but I think turning that into an active, sort of a sense of agency rather than a defensiveness, rather than a fearfulness. It's like, but when we talk so much about yoga too, right? Like you're a yoga master, and you're doing it all the time. Just like, how aware can I be? How volatile? How like available to every present moment? It's a necessity. It's like,
well, it's definitely a necessity in my constant state of flux of impermanence with everything going on in my exterior life. So
But one of the things you might manage to do with this work too is like clear out, I mean you talk about them in terms of personal objects, but you've kind of cleared out any of the dust or the sentimentality or like, you know, they're totally.
That's why I was saying it doesn't really matter.
They're Home Depot.
Yeah.
You know, like they don't, it doesn't really matter, it's for you, but like it doesn't actually get in the way of my looking at them at all.
I think that goes more towards the economic use of materials that I come into contact with as opposed to, I'm not searching out a sentimental object to throw into something. You know, I'm not.
I just wanted to make an observation that apparently you're very successful in concentrating these on the subjective, and like you said, it's for where and to transmitting the experience like you were talking about with you can't find words exactly because everybody that's talking is also saying like is also saying like do you understand what I mean? Does anybody else?
Well, I noticed that, and I appreciate that.
So that does seem to highlight the success of the work as far as keeping things based on that. Is that everybody's like, do you know what I mean? Like, does that make any sense to anybody else?
In some ways, it's like relieving to me that your process is more additive than subtractive in light of what like Molly and Dana were just saying. Instead of, you know, like it's sort of like, to use a like Laneism, like there's a conveyor belt of stuff that's like coming through your studio in your life, and you're sort of taking the pieces and assembling it into the sculpture, but instead of then giving the sculpture the sort of, you know, like the giant bronze piece of crap, like, and then how do I chip away from this to make it the perfect object? It's just sort of like taking what's there and repurposing it and using it instead of then, in some ways it seems like it would give the work, or in the studio, like seem like too weighty to then step back and then address it from a sense of like chisel away what's already there.
Because the decision's already been made.
Yeah.
that would be too weighty. Can we talk for a second about that? I mean, I totally agree, but why would, because that's too masterpiece,
Yeah,
yeah?
it seems
Too
that
much
way.
intervention.
And it seems like then you would arrive at a
That
point,
something is revealed, we don't want revelation. Is that it?
somewhat, but it seems like then you would arrive at a point before the sort of object allows itself to come into being, or that sort of transitional nature where there's already a recognition or self-awareness that would sort of erode that.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I think we're talking about the difference then between monumentality and intimacy. Right, like we were saying this the other day, and it's related, like the new sculpture of Dr. King, they just put in the Washington Mall, makes me extremely upset. Because what happens when you're making a monument is you're eliminating nuance, you're eliminating detail, you have to sort of have a programmatic, systemic, like, elimination of a lot of confusing stuff to find the perfect form. You know, and like sculpture is such a, for me, a dismal failure because it's this figure sort of arrested at the moment of emerging from this block. But like, it's absolutely permanent, it's a thing. Like people are, every time there's a civil rights advance, people are gonna chisel away more of the block. It's done, it's over. And I think that's actually related to Manny's first point, about like, are these, can they be stabilized more? Can they be adjusted more? Like I think that there's at least point to that kind of vitality or verbiage. Like even if it's done, it's still like, you're gonna have to reinstall this, so it's gonna be a little bit different. The piece might fall off and the sculpture might break itself overnight somehow. So they had to do this sort of tenuous anti-monument thing, I guess.
Yeah, but they're still like, they're still very like cool about it, they keep their distance, like,
Yeah.
I think I'm more struck by sort of the sexlessness and, of these objects, like I like, they just don't register like to me in that way at all, like, I mean, at least
You mean
they,
sexless or genderless?
they're different, but I think
Yeah.
sex probably, and also that's why like I can't get to like feminine, like the feminine very easily here, like I like don't see these objects as being feminine at all, like I don't know.
Well, there's like a little bit of bondage in these, but it's like really
Yeah.
loose. It's like everything fits, everything's kind of like sitting on the skin. It's not. It's like this makes me think of like this Catholic thing with the little ribbon of leather or something like that. It's like this. I think it's Catholic.
Jewish,
Jewish, sorry.
flattened.
Yeah, it makes me think of that, but it's so loose. Like, and then there's like this illusion. There's an allusion to trapping here, you know, like or something in being taught like about the spring. But the spring is kind of slack. Or it's like the slackness. I think that's what I think I would call that the slackness of the tension. Like there's an illusion of tension, contact, and physicality, but it's slack.
I think that's really nice way to describe it, I keep thinking about it as draping,
Right.
which to me is really feminine in terms, but that's how like swag or something, you know, like, it hadn't even gone to tension, I guess, for me, like, or clamping or whatever, it's just like, things are just like,
Lyrically.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like here. It's
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
But that's like really casual, non-urgent gesture though, that's
Right.
why I can't, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's like, I'm saying I think that it occurs to you to say sexist because sex is something like sex or something like that is an issue, but it's not happening. It's referred to obliquely, like at a distance.
Maybe, like, I can't even do that, I don't think, I mean, I think more of, well, like, sort of modernism at its height, when I think of like Jacques Tati's films, for instance, where he tries to make all these, like, just sort of kind of big connections, like going from inside to out, from the to out, and back up, so, I mean, I see that here, and there's sort of likeness in his films too, when he's addressing these like big issues, like the change of chimes, but he can do that, like he can make like a 2-hour, almost a musical about this, I think, and I think that takes like real talent, for instance, for like him to be able to do that. So, like when I look at this, I don't know, I think of all those moments, but I'm also thinking like, why am I like having to go back? But maybe it's just like not
Going back that far.
Yeah. Not that that's a bad thing. Yeah. So like maybe there's like a little more nostalgia here in this room than like my first impression if I'm going to Tati film than going to like Liechtenstein.
You could get some views on, or a connection to fashion. I mean, I'm seeing certain like pleating, or this could almost be a hat. I mean, there are things about it that have a feeling that they could be worn, or remnants of, which could bring a kind of softness and hardness, like armor, or when Molly said draped, you know, that feeling of fragility and a kind of softness and kind of romance about that, but yet it comes back to being kind of sharp and hard and uncomfortable, and you know, so there's kind of mixings of things like that. I thought it was interesting that, you know, you said you work with them simultaneously, but there's something really kind of serendipity about the color, of how the color came out through the show. The yellow, the orange, the certain things that you found that connect the pieces when Charles is saying, you know, are they like a company of things or an individual, but somehow in the setting of it up, the color kind of connects them in some ways. Surprising way, you know, I don't know if you, maybe it was just in the studio when you were making them, but there's something there that kind of brings them together as a kind of family or grouping.
Yeah, we've talked about these as being dysfunctional family casts or something like that.
Could be.
Just going back to the whole like different character aspect of the pieces, how they do fit and interact with each other, but maintain their own identities within. So. I'm interested in the looking at the work as sexless, or were you looking at them more as like androgynous then, or like what do you?
I just think that I
Or
said
they're
it, but I
not
felt
molded
that
together so much that it's not like a feminine or masculine strain, like being like more apparent on it.
yeah, I mean, just because we're talking about these kind of like gestures, like floppy things being ripped apart, and also like how you really like make us notice like ourselves in this room, like by bringing all the weight down, like suddenly like, oh yeah, I'm here. These are very, very physical objects. So like when I'm like the I in myself like is implicated in the work, in the show, but it's also funny that like that I like remains I. Like I don't really I don't really like I don't know why that's like would necessarily be an issue, but I look at Rachel Harrison's work, for instance. Like I know like a woman could have made her work. Also, like if I look at Veronica or like Iba Hessa, like that's like very like female, like sort of powered by like women work. And I don't see any of that present in these. That it's not a problem, but I just find it interesting. Like these work all seem to like point at me, and like I have to like think about my being here, and that like not once it's like my gender or sexuality sort of, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess,
Provoked.
are you talking more of like genderlessness, or like?
But sex and
Sort of
gender are very
like a
different
bit
things.
more-
I completely understand that.
Oh, no, I know, just that that made me want to ask the question, like, what exactly then is the balance and relationship between sort of genderlessness in this work and also libidinousness or non-libidinousness, basically, like that kind of, like that kind of, like the difference, like what is the relationship to that in the work is what I was going to ask off of what she was saying.
I don't know how to answer that.
Or is like the idea of libidinousness completely just the modernist idea? Is this beyond that? Like that's another question, I guess.
Beyond? You kidding? What?
Not beyond this, but like sort of like not.
Libido is modern?
Talk to my hand.
No, I'm not talking about, I was more talking about, the fact, like lavidiousness being like some kind of like, I shouldn't use like whether or not there was like I don't know, even using the word, maybe it was a larger apology, because even using the word libido or lividiousness, especially coming from me, a male, is, it's using a Freudian term like that, we're talking about the sexlessness of it or the genderlessness of it. Like, for me, using that term libidinousness,
It's like long for you to ask.
It becomes phallocentric and sort of, I think I'm really inventing a word here, but like penetrationist, if you want.
Is it because it's an invasive question or invasive?
But I like how you took your hat off to say that. It's a nice
Is sex an issue here though, at all in the work? That's.
Or is
I keep going to, and it's just like, because I don't find it to be the contradictions that are going on in the work, and I think it seems like the work is more about resolving contradictions than anything else. And if that is not a contradiction to you, then I don't necessarily see the need for it in the work. It seems like it is.
But that's also one of the great things about artwork, period, is that you can start to, add all these things together and it just becomes.
Well, that's the thing, is like it's the collapsing into a totality in some way. It's like trying to figure that out.
You mean totality or tautology?
Totality. Yeah. And like, it's like it's becoming non-dualistic in some way. That's kind of how in some way.
It's just work.
That's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than having like I don't
That's what
find
I meant
sex
my whole sort
a
of,
concern.
my whole comment, having framing this as mainstream, I think that was sort of what I meant, collapsing into a totality. That's exactly it. Like, if this is the stream, if this is the thing, if this is where we all are, then it's like, to me, it's genderless, it's classless, even almost. I mean, if you take 99% or whatever, then there's this sort of like.
What do you mean by all? I mean, I think it's where she is.
Yeah, I'm extrapolating. I'm saying like where she is, which maybe would have been a
Might be where other people are.
which might be something we might have talked about in terms of sexuality or in terms of all these different things 40 years ago.
She did say something about a state of mind, which I really get.
Right, which is very present.
whether
It's just more like this is just in the air. It's
Right,
unmonumental, it's temporal, it's provisional, it's just
symptomatic.
happening and symptomatic.
So it's not
nothing
locked into,
Yes.
yes, and it's not locked into Veronica as an isolated subject, it's not the word that Audrey introduced to me the other day, in consciousness.
Right.
Like, we recognize it because it's symptomatic, because within this sort of cultural consciousness right now, she walk through the world being alert, a little bit paranoid, a little bit watchful for things you can use and then reuse. I think that's
Well, what the energy serves at this point in time in history does not necessarily discount where the energy could be said to be coming from. I'm not saying that that's
of course.
I'm not saying that's how I personally feel. I'm just sort of saying that like that's as a possibility. But I wasn't meaning anything like.
No, I love that you can say something and then categorize it as something that might be play to say. It's really And so my question about you saying it was, are you being penetrationist by asking questions which are invasive? Or is it a penetrationist thing to talk about? Does that make sense?
So sort of both at the same time. I mean, because like if you really, there are a lot of things that are sort of going in this work. There's a lot of things that are sort of going through other things. Like even the one that's in my biggest, the one that's like in my biggest realm of view right now. The triangle going in through or making an opening. Considering that like the plastic. From the way I'm viewing it right now, the mylar or whatever is opening way to let through this this large triangular thing. Like I don't know.
That's just like an utterly penetrationist
No, is that there are those forms
Right.
that are there to be found. I was wondering what kind of relationship those forms that could be found had to do what is found, like when talking about like genderless. Does that actually come into play though, the fact that there are forms available that could be found to be whatever penetrationist or whatever you want? Again, does that make any sense?
I think for me, there's another gesture which is as strong,
Yeah.
which is more like tucking or something.
Tucking,
like,
yeah.
like an Easter basket filling almost.
Mhm.
Like there's this sort of like, or putting garbage into something. You know,
Yeah.
but just this sort of like, which is so different from something penetrating something else. And like,
Mm-hmm.
and you were talking earlier about like, I could drill some holes in that and I could do that. And I know I watch you in your studio and I've stopped it a number of times and I know how things can look in terms of the sort of violence of the gesture. And it's true, the more I look at these things, and I think it's actually taken me a long time to get the studio out of my head in looking at these objects because I'm so familiar with the way you work. But people are totally right, those gestures aren't inherent in the final product. But they are sort of really transformed in a way that it's taken me a long time to see.
All the potential energy is spent. There are these fluid gestures of like in the present meetings of material, of substance with surface, like in the painterly sense. But then it's cropped and it's assembled and it's taped provisionally. So there's like a delicateness to the ultimate result.
Yeah.
That's a good word. I do get the feeling that a lot of these pieces are sort of cropped from, like I said before, from a larger activity that is in
That's
production.
true.
Yeah, they're definitely sort of.
Yeah.
Or wiped up,
Yeah.
white idea of cleaned up. I mean, we're missing the spills and the chills.
Actually, all
We're missing the what?
Even
The spills and the
Missing
chills.
the,
Right.
Yeah.
To see what was there and was wiped away, or
Yeah, like
yeah, and I really only then show those aspects of it within the photography, that are parts that are still even cropped into that activity and seen enough so that the viewer is still limited to seeing all of that activity. Does that make sense?
and that's your choice. I mean,
Yes.
evidently.
Yes.
because if you did like a really, I see what you mean like with the smaller piece, with the wall pieces. But if you did like a really, really large piece, it would have more of the idea of, it would have more of the sort of what you call the spills and chills just from the fact that its size. I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm just wondering like with that, like.
I just made a 110-pound piece.
That's awesome.
Yes.
That's like a that's like a high
Yeah.
school cheerleader.
I can move it around. I'm strong though. I like to give myself so hard.
Perfect size.
Penetration is and
How come
Um,
sorry.
I'm so impressed, I don't know.
Check that guy.
How come you didn't use this room?
Like my studio in here?
Or not as a that's the
Yeah.
I was even like thinking that might have been a problem
Yeah.
for me if like I saw it was
Yeah.
anyway. But it was more of like these like small like little kind of like nuance changes that you have, like the screws,
yeah.
it's changed, but you didn't bother to patch it up. Maybe you did patch these up, but you didn't paint over them or something like that. And I'm just kind of curious as to why, it's like they're just so slight, these things. And I'm wondering how come you didn't?
Like what would happen if I completely showed and bared all and showed all the nastiness?
Not
Is that what you're
not all
saying?
the nastiness, but more of like this.
It's something.
Or just like when you, or more of like when you had a notion to come back here and shift or
Yes,
replace them.
I
And
did
like
that.
actually, if you're thinking of these as characters, why don't they have a life rather than a place or something like that in the room? And I'm kind of curious about that.
Like why
Why don't they have a life instead of a place?
Wait.
Sorry, go ahead. It's yours.
Why don't they have a life instead of a place?
Instead of a place, like they're placed right now and they're arranged and they're kind of permanent.
Okay.
But these kind of like slight adjustments also suggest that they could be more or something like that, or they could have like a life in the room by themselves.
Yeah, like overnight this guy moved.
Oh, that one guy with wheels. I know, I'm. So,
Like, when we came in and the one that toppled.
Yes.
yeah.
But there is one instance of life, I think, in the room, and it's this, which I won't talk about forever. Just like that's the one thing not attached to anything else, like that's two pieces and they're regarding each other. And the interaction is taking place without us. It isn't just like prop, variable body, things cope
Right.
with. It's like those two are having the entire exchange independent of me. How is that?
Yeah.
It's happening. Like
Okay, I see what you're saying.
I've seen
Yeah, I see what you're
pictures
saying.
about that, yeah.
it's big, oh sure, like it's the elephant in the mouse, or it's like, yeah, there's an interaction actually.
That interaction exists regardless of us,
Yes.
regardless of our questions.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if that was the thought at all, so.
Sorry, Sean.
No, that's cool. That's perfect. I didn't even see that.
I don't know where to start with, I guess, answering your question or not, but
You can.
you know, with the moments, like the decisions with keeping some of these underlying activities, just having a few of them highlighted, as opposed to having a lot of it highlighted. For one, I don't want to replicate my studio process in a gallery.
Yeah.
You know, I don't,
That's totally understandable.
yeah, and so, but, you know, a moment like that, I did install this and slept on it, woke up one morning, I was like, that needs to be lower, it's not right, and so, you know, moving it down, it was definitely like, I liked that conversation and the idea that it wasn't right yet, like it was more the understanding that that choice needed to be made, and so I didn't want to cover up that decision, and for me, that made it more confident in its position in the space.
Right.
And like, that it really does retain its life and need to be here because of that decision. And so I wanted to keep it there. And that's residue from the previous show, Steven's show. And so that decision to be left is because of the imperfections in these pieces and the obvious tie to the materials and the imperfections because it's such a pristine space. And, I don't know if that answers it, but I guess I liked just having those few elements. We were talking about how these pieces they look more delicate and not aggressive and not violent, even though some of the processes involved in it retain that. Like, I just wanted to have a few elements of that process there. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, did you just like wiped up or cleaned up? Like cleaned up mostly.
Right. Correct.
Almost completely.
Correct.
Not quite. Yeah.
And you're not trying to make a whole environment the way that like Sarah C used in the 90s with like,
Right, like this isn't one, yeah.
this is pieces.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing that makes us feel like right now too, that there are these fragile pieces and they're kind of alone and around each other instead of the 90s drop installation where everything was just kind of like referencing other pieces, but it was a world. There's no world in here, there's hardly even a room. It feels more like the pieces are
More alienated.
It's more critical.
Yes.
yeah.
No, you're right, and they're provoking what they're inviting or demanding. And simultaneously, it seems like one-to-one encounters. Like, I mean, yeah, I was calling the piece outside Jenny, and whenever I came in to sit, I was just like, hi guys. Like, not like, ooh, hey environment, but like, hello individual things. Like,
Yeah, it's so nice,
I like that.
honestly, it's refreshing.
yeah.
It's a change, it's something that's happening, it's great.
No, you're really right about that. But there isn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you kind of go, it's you and the object, my sense was that I could just kind of circle around it. I wasn't in something. It's like the negative space is here to just be negative space.
To point out the isolation of the variables.
Yeah, not so much that it holds the pieces in, but that it recedes.
What about, since we're making comparisons, maybe somebody in the room is more familiar with the unmonumental, that whole conversation,
Right.
what's the relationship? Is this unmonumental decidedly, or are there differences, or is this a terrible to talk about? I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know.
How do these things feel or show?
It's just,
Well, I sort of looked at that, but I didn't I wasn't interested in sculpture at the time.
I
So I was sort of like,
more like there's a disintegration, when you're talking about, not looking at things with class, not looking at things that way, that there isn't, that is actually healthier to do so, or it just seems like the way you have to look at it now. I don't know who I mean by we, but, it feels like monuments are meaningless now, I think.
right,
Well, things to be toppled anyway.
Things to be taught.
Yeah, at this point.
if you know that everything is gonna change in history, that the sculpture will be toppled,
Right?
at the end of whatever era, then why bother doing it?
And the earth will eventually be swallowed up by the sun.
So why bother getting out?
Yeah.
Well, okay, like, I mean, that's the thing about, I mean, not to try to rehabilitate my feminine comment, because I don't really want to, I'm not interested in that, but I think I would kind of go more monumental or intimate, I guess, you know.
Or fragility.
Sure, and like, and like, the presentation.
I think connect that to feminine.
You don't want to.
I think, I hate to connect just
Yeah.
that word to feminine,
yeah.
but to, a kind of humanness,
Sure.
fragility, as part of the scheme of things. Needs to have that to me, a kind of, you know, like if things are unhooked or fastened, something could happen. I mean, it could fall apart, things could fall apart.
Well, I think that has a tie to that sense of, like, I mean, I wouldn't want to say paranoid, but that constant awareness and that constant state of being where it is slightly paranoid that things can change, the constant flux, things can go to pieces. So it's like always staying in that present moment and on your toes a little bit. But I think that's why I'm glad to hear read as genderless and classless and whatnot. So it is more of these, not neutral, but kind of and I don't know where I'm going with this. A neutral, I lost my train of thought, kind of where I was going with that, but I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, neutrality or tranquility as regards the human, like Judith just
Yeah, I guess it was more just the relation for the human state of being of this like constant state of awareness and being careful that things could fall apart or things aren't stable, and I guess that's what I was trying to say. Things aren't stable, and I think that could be parallel to everyone. Nothing is stable for anyone. And I guess my belief. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
Anyway.
But there is something about.
But there's a beauty in that instability, I think.
Right, but it's ironic that these are frozen like a paint, these are frozen in time right now, I mean, they
Yeah.
ain't moving.
Yeah.
But they have in the interior of it, a kind of whimsy, you know, delicate, vulnerable thing about them. You know, they're concrete and they're made of this and that, but yet there's something still fragile about them, which I find, I like that. I mean, they look kind of tough and yet they're kind of delicate at the same time.
I think the toughness of the work, like in general here, doesn't come from necessarily like sort of the rougher material or like treatment or moments, but rather sort of like I don't see these as being neutral at all, because also like I don't think neutrality is a position, you know, it's like it's just isn't. But I think like the sort of fragility is almost like a front, because I think the fragility is like what the fragility, I'll quote fragility, is actually like your work is like sort of really impervious to these like concerns, and they like that's their position, that's its position, that it's gonna be like, fuck you, I can like have all of these things, and this could all be part of my work. So like that's why like they're not fragile, and I mean I think that's great. Not fragile, like, you know, it's like really delicate blown piece of glass. that you like put
Yeah,
in.
that's true too.
It's not like that at all.
Because although that they have the potential for possibly breaking or moving, they still retain a solid like
Yeah.
power and stance.
Yeah, that's like, it's their position, yeah.
Does that have to do with saying you, like we were talking about earlier, just being sort of impervious to a lot of these concerns, and like, when Veronica says you, it means I, like you is everybody else, I'm just like, presuming that like we have the same concerns that you have, absolutely, like when Pauline Kael's writing about the movie, she's like, "The last day in Paris, you feel like this," presumably everybody who's reading this is sort of like, it's this sort of like insistence, I think, about the imperviousness of the objects to whatever words I'm temporarily trying to affix to them, to like note, to name them. The issue of naming too was coming up earlier when you're like, that's a vase, and that's a paint tube, like, these are impervious to us in another way, which is like, I can't really name them past a certain point. Just like, drawer, I think, ish, but then it kind of goes away. I can name, I can name two things, and it just sort of like, begins to extrapolate out and enter into kind of poetics where I can't know it.
That's really nice, especially with the piece of cardboard inside of this structure. That thing in there with the slats on it has been transformed just enough so that I keep seeing it as this ghost of packing something. And like what it was supposed to be packing, like the way in which it's the absent, it's the thing you would throw away, right? The discard part of something that you would have put in your house and done something with, whether it's an air conditioner or a hard drive or, you know, a wine rack or something. It's like all these, so like objects have been sort of marching through my mind throughout this entire conversation.
What that could have held.
What it held, yeah, and how those things fit together inside of cardboard boxes, the whole technology or whatever. Yeah, I like reading that thing over as that. And not knowing what the things that it is, or who it was.
Also, because it's going to transform.
Yeah,
Everything tries to transform.
everything tries to transform, which is like something we can talk about, but like styrofoam versus concrete is one of the funniest sort of jokes in your book for me. Like, oh, this is styrofoam, yeah, this is concrete, and so then like it's really heavy, it's really light, and I always think about finding out the Taco Bell was actually made out of styrofoam once, which is like one of the big revelations of my entire life. Like somebody had taken like, maybe they'd run into it with their car or something, you know, Taco Bell, they'll have those big like planters outside that are sort of, the whole thing is like an adobe structure.
The architectural elements outside of
Okay.
But somebody had actually taken a hammer or a car or something and driven into it, something, and
Got it,
pulled away
got
from
it, got it, got
and it was styrofoam.
So you recognize it.
And I was like, motherfucker.
Yeah.
It's insane! Like, temporary architecture, oh my god. Yeah. And I love that play. Because then I picture like you get under 10 pounds and I'm like, oh, I wonder.
Yeah,
Because I could never tell it weight.
Anyway, which lasts longer, concrete or styrofoam.
Right.
Styrofoam.
Decidedly.
Well, how
Yeah.
many people crash a car into a taco?
Probably more than me.
On college campus.
I applaud you, I think that's great.
Should we have the final comment or
Yeah.
and close up? I feel like people's butts are probably
Yeah, no,
I feel like
thanks for everyone's comments.
maybe you were gonna say something about Kickstarter.
Yes, I will be doing a 3-wall residency in January, and I'm very excited about that. And so I'll have a Kickstarter page started, like hopefully this week. So I just wanted to throw that out there that I'll be doing that. So thank you for reminding me, because I forgot about that.
Congratulations on the 3
Okay,
Thank you very much. Thank you guys for allowing me to show my work here. And
Thank you so much.
Super
Thank you for
encouraged.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming.
Do you want to say anything else at the end, or?
Just thank you for your comments and for coming and talking about my work, and it was beneficial to me, so I enjoyed it.